Good evening. Great to be learning with you on a Monday night, Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. Thank you for tuning in an hour later than normal. As I've been mentioning the last few days, that we're working on color grading our new movie. Just in that color suite with the big, amazing monitor, fine-tuning the color of our movie all day long. Very happy for this change of pace and to be learning with you, my holy sisters and brothers. Who's in the house? Sharon in New Jersey, Bill in Missouri, Paul in the Great Northwest, Shandora in the Bronx, Karen in Northern California, Bella in Florida, Paula in Chicago, Joe in the Inland Empire, Stephen in New Hampshire, Guy in Ohio, excuse me, Melissa in Great Neck. Over on the YouTube side, Marjorie in Georgia, Ella's in the house, Chaim in Florida, Christine in Northern California. I said Melissa in Great Neck. Welcome, everybody. So we're going to do this daf. It's a relatively short daf, so I suspect the class will take about 40-45 minutes. And then a little bit later, so at about 8:15 p.m. Pacific, I'm actually going to go live again. We have a special guest, Raz Ben Moshe, the author of this book, amazing book, The Laughter Effect, talking about the healing power of laughter as therapy. She's a very colorful speaker, visiting the United States. We're fitting her now at this kind of unusual time because she's visiting from Australia, and this is when we could do it, considering I'm in the color suite all day long, every day this week. So that's going to be tonight at approximately 8:15 Pacific, and that'll just be on Facebook, right? That's going to be a Facebook Live. And we'll have Q&A with her. So if you have questions about laughter therapy, that is going to be the time to do it. And again, the rest tonight through Thursday, we're going to be 7 p.m., 1 hour later than normal this whole week through Thursday. Then Friday, we'll be back at our regular Friday time of noon Pacific. Okay. Our daf tonight is page 26. Chaf Vav. Here in Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud, we're continuing our journey through chapter 2, generally speaking, the laws of lost objects. Tonight we open Mishna number 4 here in chapter 2, and we pick this up near the bottom of page 25b. Mishna number 4, if one found lost items in a heap of stone rubble, or in an old stone wall, in an old wall, right? And when they're talking about old walls in Talmudic times, right? I mean, you know, there's a lot of nooks and crannies in the wall. Sometimes they're kind of like very thick stone walls, piles of stones piled up on top of each other, city walls, home walls, building walls, fortress walls. There's all kinds of walls that are made of, piled up stones. And so there are many nooks and crannies. And what's going on here is that somebody, hid something in the wall. Like, how did this object get inside the wall? Somebody placed it there, probably as a hiding spot. But how long ago did they do that? Maybe they hid something there and forgot about it, right? Think about if you saw Fargo, if you remember the movie Fargo, in case you haven't seen it, I don't want to give too much away, but there's a scene in that movie where somebody hides something intending to come back later. It was not a very clever place to hide it. On the side of a highway when, in the snow, no markings. I mean, I don't know how that guy thought he was going to get back and find it. But something like that, this object that was hidden, that guy's not coming back. He's not going to find it. Somebody does find it, can they assume that the owner despaired, right? Generally speaking, an object that is lost becomes an ownerless object, meaning finders keepers, if we have good, strong reason to assume that the owner who lost that object would have despaired of ever getting it back. And that's why it becomes ownerless and it can be kept. So again, if one found lost items in a heap of stone rubble or in an old wall, so these belong to him, to the finder. If one found lost items in a new wall, then from its midpoint and outward, they belong to the finder. If he found the items from the midpoint and inward, they belong to the homeowner, right? So the outer portion of the wall means the wall on the public thoroughfare, and somebody walking by might have concealed an object there, and that's considered an extension of the public domain, even though the wall belongs to the homeowner. But if it's, deep inside the wall, right, from the midpoint of the wall inward, then even though it might be accessible to the public domain, it's in there enough that that's going to be considered property of the homeowner. From the midpoint and outward, they belong to the finder. From the midpoint and inward, they belong to the homeowner. If the homeowner would rent the house to others on a regular basis, and there was a steady turnover of residents, so even if one found lost items inside the house, these belong to him, right? It's like finding something in a hotel room. People come and go. A hotel room, I think you got to turn it into the hotel, right? But this idea that somebody rented out, it's not like he's a concierge. There's no desk clerk. They're not doing, maid service, right? It's just that people have rented it and left. And there's no telling this object that was found, did it belong to the last tenant or a previous tenant, right? That's kind of the situation we're talking about. And so in that situation, they belong to the finder. Since the owner of the lost items cannot be identified based on location, right? It's an object without a distinguishing mark. So what we're relying on is the location of where it was found. But since different people have frequented that location, just the fact that it was lost there is not going to be a good enough distinguishing mark. That's Mishnah number 4. Now the Gemara. So the Mishnah teaches that if one found a lost item in a heap of rubble or in an old wall, it belongs to him. So the sages taught in a baraisa it is his due to the fact that when the owner of the heap of stone or rubble, right, or the wall claims the property, the finder can say to him, well, these objects belong to the Amorites who lived in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, before it was conquered by the Jews at the time of the conquest of Joshua, right? Meaning when the Jews came out of Egypt, delivered by strong hand and an outstretched arm of God, the 10 plagues, parting of the sea, revelation at Sinai, etc. And eventually, after 40 years in the desert, Joshua leads the Israelites into the land and dispossess the land of its former inhabitants, who were not nice people. These were people who practiced child sacrifice and all manner of evil deeds and idolatry, and God wanted them out. And so the Jews, as the Bible explains at length, took over the land at that time. But there were people who lived there before. So when the land was being conquered, right, in those wars of conquest led by Joshua and assisted strongly by God, some of these people, among them the Amorites, would hide treasure like in the walls of their houses and then maybe flee, intending to come back later after the storm passed, as it were. But for them, the storm never passed. They ended up living somewhere else. And this is actually something we read about when we talk about saras, right? The skin condition, that is the spiritual manifestation, the physical manifestation of a spiritual condition on skin, but there's also saras of a house, right? And so we learn that if somebody develops certain kinds of splotching that's not like mold, but it's a very particular kind of splotching on the walls of a home, it can be saras of a home. And if it's bad enough, the home has to be torn down. But the spiritual teaching that arose from that is sometimes you have a terrible calamity. It's like, oh my God, I have to tear down my house. But when they tear down the walls, they find this old treasure that the Amorites had hidden in the walls. So likewise, there were some of these homes that were then taken over by the tribes of Israel when they entered the Holy Land. And so sometimes they would find, these objects left behind by the Amorites. Now, those objects left behind did not, even though they might be found, let's say, in the region of a particular tribe of the tribes of Israel, it wouldn't belong to that tribe. It would belong generally to the Jewish people, meaning finders, keepers for these very ancient treasures. I mean, this could have been found centuries later, like many centuries later, when those people were long gone. So that's why he's saying if something is found in a wall and it is old, then the finder gets it because he found it first. Nobody else has a superior claim to him. Now the Gemara asks, well, why are you going to attribute that only to the Amorites who were there before Joshua led the Israelites in? Maybe it was Jews who hid it there since the conquest, right? So the Gemara asks, is that to say that Amorites conceal items in walls, but Jews do not conceal items? Perhaps it was the homeowner who placed the item in the wall or the heap. And the Gemara answers, no, the bris is necessary only in the specific case where the item is extremely rusted, indicating that it had been there for a long time. Meaning if it hadn't been there for a long time, if it was not some kind of ancient artifact, then you can't just keep it, right? Then you apply the rules of, well, if it's close to the home, it belongs to the homeowner. If there's any distinguishing feature on it, we're going to proclaim the find, etc. Now we're on 26a. Now the Mishnah teaches if one found lost items in a new wall, from its midpoint and outward, they belong to him. But if you found the items from the midpoint, of the thickness of the wall and inward, they belong to the homeowner. So Rav Ashi said the determination of ownership with regard to a knife found in a wall follows the handle. And the determination of ownership with regard to a money pouch follows the laces of the opening of the pouch. If the handle of the knife or the laces of the pouch face inward, so they belong to the homeowner. If the handle or laces face outward, they belong to the finder. Meaning, do we have reason to believe it was stuck into the wall from the public domain, or that it was stuck into the wall from within the building? The Gemara asks, but if so, what is the applicability of the ruling of the Mishnah, which teaches if one found lost items in a new wall, from its midpoint and outward, they belong to him, and from its midpoint and inward, they belong to the homeowner? But instead, to determine ownership, let us see if its handle faces inward, or if its handle faces outward, or if the straps face inward or the straps face outward. Which is it? And so the Gemara answers, the Mishnah is referring to a case where one found rags or metal strips that don't have a handle. So it's not clear, the hand that inserted the object into the wall, from where did that hand come? Because some objects don't have a handle or don't have laces that a person would have used to shove in there. It is taught if the hollow in the wall was filled with lost items, for example, coins, the homeowner and the finder divide them. And the Gemara asks, isn't that obvious? And the Gemara answers, no, it is necessary to teach this only in a case where the hollow in the wall is inclined toward one side of the wall, lest you say that all the items were initially on the elevated side, and due to the incline they slip and fill the entire space. The Tana teaches us that the homeowner and the finder divide them. There was a case, not long ago, I think it was in Texas. Had nothing to do with Jews and Jewish law, but I believe, as I recall, that the case was something like somebody had a ranch and they were having a road graded, from the main road out to the house, quite a long road, and they brought a worker in, and the worker started to do the work. And then the worker, I think, dug, sort of went beyond what the homeowner had asked him to do in order to make a better road or something like that, and then unearthed ancient, like old coins, like Confederate era, I think silver or even gold coins. So it was a real treasure that was found, just in terms of the metal value. Not to mention the historical value. And so then what? It was found on the owner's property, but he never would have found it if this guy hadn't done the work and sort of gone beyond what was expected of him to do an extra good job. So I think maybe the worker wanted to keep it or split it. The owner didn't want to split it. I don't know. But, and we haven't, come across a law for that case yet either. But it's just interesting. I can't remember what the outcome of that was. If somebody does, maybe they'll put in the comments. Okay. So the Mishnah teaches, if the homeowner would rent the house to others on a regular basis, and therefore there was a steady turnover of residents, so even if one found lost items inside the house, these belong to the finder, right? The current resident. And so the Gemara asks, and why do they belong to the finder? Let us follow the last renter and determine that he is the owner of the items. Didn't we learn in the Mishnah, Tractate Shekalim 7:2, with regard to money that was found before animal merchants in Jerusalem? It is always assumed to be money of the second tithe, as most of the animals purchased in Jerusalem during festivals, right, were bought with second tithe money. And this law applies both during a festival and throughout the year, as people would typically purchase animals for meat with their second tithe money. So if the money was found on the Temple Mount, it is considered non-sacred money. And this law applies even during a festival when people would come to Jerusalem with second tithe money in hand, as it can be assumed that one who entered the Temple Mount had already spent the money and only non-sacred money is left in his possession, right? Second tithe is something that you have to set aside of your tithes so that you have what to eat and drink when you make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. This was only when the temple was standing. Once you got to Jerusalem, you would spend that money, right, on animals that you would bring as peace offerings, a portion of which would go on the altar, but the rest would be for you to rejoice and feast and eat meat. Or maybe it wasn't even a peace offering. You were just eating it while you were in Jerusalem for a festival, or purchasing wine to drink and be merry. Once you spent that money, it's no longer sacred because you desacralized it by buying what it was intended for, right? Second tithe money used to purchase the food and drink for your needs while you're up in Jerusalem on the festival. And so this money would be assumed to be desacralized second tithe money, and not, for example, the annual shekels that were sanctified. It means that they had to be brought to the temple and deposited in the temple treasury and couldn't be used to purchase anything. So here we're talking about what assumptions we make when we find money. What assumptions can we make about that money? Who did it belong to? What was it used for? Based on the location where it is found. So the Mishnah continues, and if the coins were found elsewhere in Jerusalem, then the following distinction applies. If it was found during the rest of the days of the year, not on a festival, it is considered non-sacred money. But if the money was found during the festival, when many people would come to Jerusalem with their second tithe money, all the money is presumed to be second tithe money, and perhaps that hasn't been spent yet, and so you can't just pick it up and use it. And Rav Shemaiah Bar Zera says, in explanation of the Mishnah, what is the reason that during the rest of the year the money is considered non-sacred, even on the day after the festival? Since the markets of Jerusalem tend to be cleaned every day, any money left there would already have been found by the street cleaners. Consequently, any money found there must have been left there recently. So apparently we say that each of the first coins is gone, and these coins are other ones, i.e. they were left there after the conclusion of the festival. So here too, with regard to lost items found in a rented house, why not say that the items belonging to each of the first renters are gone, and these items that you just found must have belonged to the last renter that was here? And Reish Lakish said in the name of Bar Kapara, the Mishnah that states that the item belongs to the finder is referring to a case where the homeowner rendered his house an inn, pundak, for 3 Jews. Since it is unclear to which of them the item belonged, the owner despairs of its recovery. Now, the Gemara previously, on page 24a, raised a dilemma with regard to the law stated by Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar that a lost item found in a location frequented by the multitudes belongs to the finder. So, is the law in accordance with the ruling of Shimon ben Elazar? because there were multiple renters coming here, or because a place was rented to 3 Jews or more? Do we consider that a multitude, which means that whoever dropped it would have despaired of recovering it and therefore finders keepers, or not? Moreover, is his ruling specifically with regard to a location with a Gentile majority, right, where Gentiles are not obligated by the laws of the Torah, and so they would just find it and keep it, and they wouldn't feel the obligation to take this object and take care of it and proclaim that it was found and try to find the Jew who lost it. The Gentiles are under no such obligation. So if it was lost in a place where the majority of the people are non-Jews, then surely whoever dropped it, even if he was a Jew, would have despaired of recovering it, and therefore finders keepers, right? So based on the opinion of Bar Kapara, the Gemara suggests, conclude from it, that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, even in a location with a Jewish majority. Right? If it was dropped in a place where there are multitudes, the owner despairs of recovering it because it had no distinguishing marks and no one's going to be able to identify who dropped it based only on the fact that it was dropped in that location where multitudes pass. Now, the Gemara rejects this conclusion and presents an alternative explanation of the latter clause of our Mishnah. Rather, Rav Menashe Bar Yaakov said the Mishnah is referring to a case where he rendered his house an inn for 3 Gentiles. So the multitude of people here, 3 or more, are non-Jews. So according to that explanation, perhaps Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar issued his ruling specifically in a location with a Gentile majority, but he did not issue his ruling for a place where the majority of the people are Jews. So Rav Nachman said that Rabbi Bar Avos said, even if you say that the owner rendered his house an inn for 3 Jews, one cannot conclude that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar issued his ruling even in an area with a Jewish majority. And what is the reason that the item belongs to the finder? It is because the person from whom the item fell despairs of its recovery. The one who lost the item says to himself, now, no other person was with me here, only these residents of the inn. And I said in their presence several times, please return the item to me. And they did not return it to me. And is it likely that now they are going to return it? If their intention was to return the item, they would have already returned it to me. And the fact that they did not return it to me indicates that either nobody found it, or if one of them did find it, he intends to keep it, which is robbery, but I'm not going to get it back, and therefore the person despairs of recovering it, and that's why it became finders keepers. And Rav Nachman follows his standard line of reasoning. As Rav Nachman says, if one saw a sela, which is a coin, that fell from one of 2 people, he is obligated to return it. And what is the reason? The person from whom the sela fell does not despair of recovering it. He says to himself, after all, no other person was with me, only this one who was with me. As he is unaware that the seller was found by a third party, he therefore thinks, I will seize the guy who was with me and say to him, hey, did you take this coin? If you took it, give it back to me. And we are on 26b now. So in a case where the coin fell from 3 people, one of 3 people, and we don't know which, then the finder is not obligated to return it. What is the reason? Because the person who dropped the seller certainly despairs of recovering it. Why? Because he says to himself, after all, 2 other people were with me. If I seize this one and say, did you take my coin? He will say, I did not take it. And if I seize that one, he will say, I did not take it. And since he cannot make a definitive claim, he despairs of recovering his coin. Now that's assuming that he asked, right? Maybe he's unaware that he lost it, but we're not even actually dealing with that situation now. We're just saying that at least according to Shimon ben Elazar, you drop it in a place where there are multitudes, and multitudes can mean 3 or more, then it is likely that the owner despaired of recovering it, and that's why the finder can keep it. Now, it must be that we're talking about something without distinguishing marks, because if there was a distinguishing mark, then why should the guy despair of losing it? You know, maybe the people with him didn't find it, and somebody will find it and say, hey, I found this thing. Can you identify it? And then the guy will get it back. So he wouldn't have despaired. So I think we're talking about something without distinguishing features. Now, based on the fact that by Torah law, one must return a lost item to the owner only if it is worth 1 peruta, Rava said, okay, so you're not under obligation if somebody drops some rice off their plate to go chase after them and say, hey, you lost this. So it has to be worth at least a peruta, but that's not saying much. A peruta is like a penny. Now, based on this, Rava said, with regard to that which you said, that in a case where the coin fell from one of three people, the finder is not obligated to return it. We said this only in a case where the total value of the lost coin, when divided by 3, does not amount to the value of 1 peruta for each and every one of them. But if it amounts to the value of 1 peruta for each and every one of them, he is obligated to return it. And what is the reason? Say that perhaps they are partners, i.e. they own the coin jointly, and consequently they do not despair that whoever was with them would have taken it and not said anything. They're all partners in ownership. We don't know if those 3 people are partners or not, but since we don't know, we can't assume that any one of them who lost the coin would have despaired of recovering it just based on the fact that he's with a couple other people and he can't, with any kind of certainty identify who took it, and therefore he must have despaired. You can't make that assumption because maybe whoever dropped it didn't despair because he and the other was co-own it and neither one of them would take it from the other. Now, there are those who say that Rava said, even if its total value is only 2 perutas, which is insufficient to provide each of the 3 partners with 1 peruta, still one is obligated to return it. And what is the reason? Say that perhaps they are partners and one relinquishes his share to another. In that case, the remaining 2 partners each have a 1 peruta share, rendering the finder liable to return it. So it's very important to note what's being said here in the sense that you have this Torah law obligation to return lost objects, and by Torah law, the minimum value of an object that you have to, take care of and proclaim you found it and try to find the owner is even if it's worth a penny, right? Or at least a penny per person if it has multiple owners. Like, this obligation is a big obligation where this is actually stated in the law. I should have probably read this to you when we opened the chapter, but I'll just do it now. This is from 2 verses in the Torah. The first is at Exodus, 2 spots in the Torah. The first is Exodus chapter 23, verses 4 and 5. If you encounter your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall return it to him. And if so for your enemy, how much more, for somebody that is just stranger to you or even your friend. And if you see the donkey of him that hates you collapsed under its burden, you shall forego passing him by, and you shall release it with him. You shall help even your enemy, someone you hate, unburden his donkey. If the donkey cannot be unburdened alone, the animal's not going to suffer because of some, feud between people. Now, at Deuteronomy 22, verses 1 through 4, you shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep wandering and disregard them. You shall return them to your brother. And if your brother be not near to you and you know him not, then you shall bring it home to your house, and it shall be with you until your brother require it, and you shall restore it to him. And so shall you do with his donkey, and so shall you do with his garment, and so shall you do with every lost item of your brother, which shall be lost from him, and you have found it. You may not disregard it, right? You can't just say, oh man, if I find that thing, I'm going to have to take care of it and proclaim it and go through all this hassle. I'll just ignore it and let somebody else find it and deal with that. No, that's a transgression. You would have then transgressed the positive mitzvah. It's worded as a negative mitzvah that you shall not disregard it, but that means you shall pick it up, right? And try to find the owner. You may not disregard it. You shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fallen down by the way and disregard them. And here's the positive commandment. You shall lift them with him. Right? So that's how strongly worded it is in the Torah, that if you see an object that you have cause to believe belongs to your brother, meaning your brother of the Jewish people, you must pick it up and make every effort to return it. Okay, now let's go back to this. And Rava says, in a case where one saw a seller that fell from another, so if he took the coin in order to steal it, and he did so before the despair of the owner, right? Before the owner has despaired of losing it. So then this person is not just a robber, right? To remember, he saw the coin fall. It's not like he was a pickpocket. He didn't take the coin out of the guy's pocket. But he saw somebody drop a coin. And he says, nice. Picks it up and takes it. Now, what has he violated? He hasn't returned the lost object, so he's certainly violating that law. And actually, he's robbing also, right? This is what Rav is going to explain. He is liable to the prohibition. He is liable, right? He is liable for the sin due to the prohibition, you shall not rob. That's Leviticus 19:13. And he is liable due to the positive mitzvah stated with regard to found items, you shall return them to your brother. That's Deuteronomy 22:1. And due to the prohibition stated with regard to one who finds an item, you may not disregard. So if you see somebody drop a coin and you don't return it to them, you have violated 3 Torah laws. And that's if you picked it up before the person despaired of recovering it. And even if you returned it after the person despaired of recovering it, it is merely a gift that he gave him. And the transgression that he performed. And he remains in violation of those commandments. Now, he did the right thing by returning it, but he still has a further atonement to make for the fact that he picked it up with the intention of keeping it, and then later he felt guilty and actually returned it after the person despaired of having recovered it. But this person will have violated these prohibitions and the positive commandment to return it. Rava continues, if he took the coin in order to return it. Okay, so he sees somebody drop a coin and he picks it up and he's intending to return it to the guy. And he did that before the owner despaired of it. And then after the despair of the owner, he intended to steal it. So he picked it up intending to return it. And then he's like, maybe I won't return it so quick. So initial intent, good. And then, so right now he's holding it and walking toward the guy with making plans to return it. And then, it doesn't come in time. The owner despairs of recovering it. So he thinks he's not going to get it back. And now the person, has changed his mind and he's not going to return it. So what then? So if he took the coin in order to return it, and he did that before the owner had despaired of recovering it, and then after the owner despairs of recovering it, the one who found it changes his intent and he decides to keep it. So now he's stealing it. So he violates a commandment due to his failure to fulfill the positive commandment of you shall return to your brother. He does not violate the prohibition of you shall not rob because at the time he picked up the coin, he did not have intention to keep it. And he does not violate the prohibition you may not disregard because he did not disregard the lost item. He picked it up with the intent to return it. It's just that before he actually returned it, he changed his mind and then he violated the commandment of you shall return. If he waited until the owner despaired of recovering the lost item and only then picked it up, so he violates a commandment, but only due to his failure to fulfill the positive mitzvah of you may not disregard. He saw it, but didn't pick it up. So then he violated you may not disregard, as he took no action until some time had passed and the owner despaired of recovering it, and then it became an ownerless item. Rava says, in the case of this person who saw that a dinar coin fell from another person into the sand, and then he found it and took it, he is not obligated to return it to its owner. And what is the reason? The reason is that the one from whom the money fell despairs of finding it. Even if the finder sees that the owner brought a sifter and is sifting through the sand, ostensibly indicating that he did not despair of finding his coin, perhaps the owner is saying, well, just as a coin fell from me in the sand, so too a coin fell from another person, and I will find some item to offset my loss. Meaning he dropped it in such a place that it's so likely to be lost, and by the time he gets back with a sifter, he's just not going to find it. He might find other stuff, but that's a situation where people typically despair of recovering it, and so it's finders keepers. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 4. Now, Mishnah number 5. If one found items without a distinguishing mark in a store, those items belong to him. We're not talking about the merchandise in the store, obviously. We're talking about a store that's frequented by a lot of customers, and he found something that has nothing to do with the merchandise of the store, but rather something that someone dropped while they were frequenting the store. Because even though the store is private property, there are multitudes of people coming in and out of there. And that is why if he found items without a distinguishing mark in a store, those items belong to him, the finder. As, since the store is frequented by the multitudes, the owner despairs of its recovery. If the items were found between the storekeeper's counter and the storekeeper, right behind the counter, then the items belong to the storekeeper. Since his customers do not typically have access to that area, presumably the items belong to the storekeeper. If one found coins before the table of a money changer, those coins belong to him because many people come and go there. If the coins were found between the money changer's chair and the money changer, right, like on the other side of his table, then those coins belong to the money changer because his clients do not typically have access to that area. In the case of one who purchases produce from another, or in a case where another sent him produce as a gift, and he found coins intermingled with the produce, those coins belong to him. If the coins were bundled, this serves as a distinguishing mark, and the finder takes the coins and proclaims what he has found and gives the owner a chance to come and identify how they were bundled to prove that he's the owner who lost it, and then he'll recover his property. That's Mishnah number 5. Now the Gemara. The Mishnah teaches that if one found coins before a money changer, those coins belong to him. Rabbi Lazar says even if the coins were found placed upon the table itself, they belong to the finder. You're like, what? On the money changer's table? We're going to assume that they were dropped by somebody who came, made change, and left and dropped some coins? Why wouldn't we assume they belong to the money changer? And so the Gemara challenges. Well, we learned in the Mishnah, if one found coins in front of the money changer, those belongs to him. Those coins belong to the finder. And this indicates by inference that if they were found on the table, the coins belong to the money changer. So the Gemara responds, say that the latter clause of the Mishnah, that if the coins were found between the money changer's chair and his table, those coins belong to the money changer. Well, this indicates by inference that if they were found on the table, they belong to the finder. Right? So we know that on the ground in front of the table belongs to the public. On the ground behind the table and in front of the chair where the money changer sits, that belongs to the money changer. And so since we know that, one rule would seem to indicate, therefore, if it in front belongs to the public, then on the table belongs to the money changer. But if behind the table belongs to the money changer, that would seem to indicate that what is on the table belongs to the public. So what are we going to do with what's on the table? So the Gemara responds, say that the latter clause, if the coins were found, I just said that. So the Gemara concludes, rather, due to the contradictory inferences from the first and latter clauses, no inference is to be learned from this Mishnah. We don't know what to do if it's found on the money changer's table. Probably the money changer finds it. He's going to be sure that it's his. If somebody else finds it, he'd be pretty chutzpahdik to take it. Probably, he'll ask, did somebody leave this here? And the money changer will go, no, that's mine. So there you go. The Gemara asks, let me see where the law came out. If one found an item, this is the halacha, right? The final conclusion. If one found an item without a distinguishing mark in a store between the table and the store owner, it belongs to the store owner. If he found it elsewhere in the store, it belongs to the finder. If it was found on the table, it belongs to the finder. And some say it belongs to the store owner. If one found money from before a money changer on the table or before the table, it belongs to the finder. If he found it between the table and the money changer, it belongs to the money changer. So the law ended up that on the table actually is part of the public domain. Okay. And maybe he didn't bring his own table, and that's why. Okay. And the Gemara asks, and Rabbi Elazar himself, from where does he derive this law that coins found on the table belong to the finder, given that apparently one cannot infer this ruling from the Mishnah? And Rava said the Mishnah is difficult for him. Why did the Tana teach specifically that when the coins are found between the money changer's chair and the money changer, these coins belong to the money changer? the Tana of our Mishnah should have taught instead if the coins were found on the table, or if the coins were found in the money-changing establishment, as it is taught in the first clause of the Mishnah, if one found items without a distinguishing mark in a store. Those items belong to him. So rather, learn from it that since the money changer typically places his money in his drawer, even if the coins are found placed upon the table itself, these belong to the finder. It's almost like if you found money, on the floor in the bank, right? Like that was dropped by a customer. It doesn't belong to the bank. Now, the Mishnah teaches in the case of one who purchases the Mishnah teaches in the case of one who purchases produce from another person, and he found coins intermingled with the produce, those coins belong to the finder. Reish Lakish says in the name of Rabbi Yanai, the sages taught this only in the case of one who purchases produce from a merchant who acquired the produce from several suppliers and is unable to determine the source of the coins. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. But in the case of one who purchases produce from a single owner, he is obligated to return the coins to the seller. And likewise, the Tana of our Mishnah who recited Mishnayos and Baraisas in the study hall of Rav Nachman taught a Baraisa before Rav Nachman, saying, the sages taught that the coins belong to the buyer only in the case of one who purchases produce from a merchant, but in the case of one who purchases produce from a single owner, he is obligated to return the coins to the seller. We have good reason to believe that those coins that came with the produce came from that person, since he didn't buy his produce from multiple merchants. And Rav Nachman said to the Tana, but does the owner thresh the grain himself? His workers thresh the grain, and the coins could belong to one of them. And the Tana said to Rav Nachman, based on the difficulty you raise, should I delete it from the collection of authoritative Baraisas? And Rav Nachman said to the Tana, no. Interpret the Baraisas referring to a case where the grain was threshed by his Canaanite slave or maidservant, and therefore any coins found intermingled with the produce do in fact belong to the owner. That's what I've got for us today. I see there are no comments or questions. Nina's telling me. So, with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow. This week, remember, all this week, Monday, today through Thursday, we're going to be at 7 p.m. Pacific, 1 hour later than normal. And so, God willing, tomorrow at 7 p.m. Pacific, we'll pick it up with Mishnah number 6 here in Tractate